Welcome to Lesson 2. The goal of this lesson is to teach you how to write your first computer program. In this lesson, you'll also learn about fundamental concepts essential for constructing an interactive and dynamic computer program. So, let's get started. The first concept is outputs. And outputs are an imperative aspect of writing a computer program. The concept, however, is not new to us though. We see and deal with outputs on an everyday basis. So what are they? Well, outputs are information that is produced or displayed. And so, for example, if you are walking down the sidewalk or you're driving down the street and you see a street sign, so Fifth Avenue, that sign in it of itself represents an output. It's information that is being displayed. So you can take in that information and make a decision on it. So you can, in this particular context, you can keep driving down the road, or you can make a turn or turn back around. Now outputs though are of two different types. You have outputs that are constant, their value does not change, and you have outputs that are dynamic in the sense that their value is dependent on various factors within their environment. And so in this particular case, this output is constant, right? If you are driving down that road in the morning or the afternoon or the evening or even at night, you can always expect that sign to say Fifth Avenue. It's not going to change. Now, the other types of outputs though is highly dependent, as I've alluded to factors within their environment. So the value that is displayed is in response to some type of explicit action that is elicited. And so we refer to that action as an input. And so the example here is if I'm wanting to cross the road, I need to indicate to the traffic signaling system that I'd like to cross the road. And I do that by explicitly eliciting an action, in this case, pressing a button. That indicates to the traffic signaling system that there is a person wanting to cross the road, some type of processing happens, and then finally the traffic signaling system will produce an output, in this case the green walking person, letting me know that it's time to cross the road. And so most programs will fall under these three concepts. You have some type of input that is provided, and then some type of processing will take place by the system or the computer program. And then finally, you'll have an output indicating the result of that computation. And so to look at another example of this, a more modern example, if you will, Google Maps is a computer system that many of us are familiar with and use on a very often basis. In order for this computer program to work, and the context here is that it allows you or provides you an efficient route starting from point A to point B. However, in order to provide you that efficient route from point A to point B, the underlying assumption is that those two data points will be provided by the user. So if I, the user, would like to interact with this computer system, the computer system cannot do its job until I provide it two important inputs. The first important input being the origin address, so where I'm starting from, and the second important input is the destination address. And once I've provided the Google Maps computer program or system those two inputs, it is now able to perform computation and processing and then finally produce an output being the route from point A to point B. So that is an example of those three constructs in a computer program. It's important when writing a computer program to act as the computer itself. And so in the previous example, if we are writing the Google Maps system and we are the computer programmer, we need to be able to ask the user or find a way to ask the user to provide us two inputs. And once we receive those two inputs, we perform some type of computation and then find another way to send those results back to the user or display them or output them back to the user. So it always helps when you're writing a computer program or tasked to write a computer program to put yourself within the context of the computer itself. So in order to start writing a computer program using our programming language of choice, Python, we need to learn how to implement those concepts in the language. And so in order to not end up like this really unhappy person who doesn't know those concepts, we're going to discuss those now. So the way that you ask or solicit the user provide you an input is by using the keyword input in Python. So it's very intuitive. And if you want to specify a very specific message to that user, you can do that within the parentheses, as we'll see in a subsequent exercise. And so if you similarly would like to implement a way of producing an output from your computer program to the user, you would use the keyword print. And just like input, you can also specify a message within the parentheses as well. And finally, if we'd like to produce some type of processing, or perform some type of processing rather, or computation within our computer system, we use what is referred to as an assignment statement, and we'll talk a little more about that in a subsequent lesson. In addition, or conjunction with operators such as arithmetic operators, the addition, the subtractions, division, multiplication, modulus operators. So let's jump into the first exercise. The first exercise asks you to create a computer program that will output the following message: "Hello world!" exclamation point. So in order to start doing that and implementing a computer program, we'll go to Coding Lab. And in Coding Lab, you'll create a username and password, and once you've registered for the course, sign in, select your course, and then go to Code Editor. Okay, so inside of our code editor, we're ready to start writing code. And so the exercise asks us to output a very specific message called "Hello World" with an exclamation point. So if you recall, in order to create an output in Python, we use the keyword print. So let's type print and then open and close our parentheses. And as I alluded to earlier, if you'd like to specify a very specific message, we can do that within the parentheses, within quotation marks. And so we type in our message, "Hello world," with the exclamation point, we click on run, and then we get our output. And so this console is the medium of interaction between the user and the computer. And so on the left pane, you write all of your code, and on the right pane, that is the medium in which the user and the computer will interact. So that's it. Believe it or not, that concludes our first exercise. Now let's move on to the final exercise of this lesson, which is to create a more dynamic computer program that prompts the user for two numbers and outputs their sum. So we get number 1, we get number 2, or two numbers rather, x and y, and then we sum those two numbers together and then produce a final result. Before I do that, let me go ahead and save this lesson, or this session, and I'll call this "Hello World," so I have that stored and I can always reference it later. I'll start a new session, and in this new session we're ready to start writing code. So let's go back. We need to prompt the user for a number, so I need to ask the user for an input. In order to do that in Python, we use the keyword input. And so I'll say input, open and close parentheses. I want to specify a message. I'll say, "Please enter your first number." Okay. And now, whatever number they give me, I need to be able to store that somewhere so I can reference it later when it's time to perform or compute the sum. And so I'll assign it to a variable called x, and we'll talk about variables in a subsequent lesson. But for now, just know that x represents a placeholder for our value. Next, we'll prompt the user for their second number. So we'll repeat the same steps by using the keyword input and specifying a message within the parentheses inside of the quotation marks. So please enter your second number. And then once again, we want to go ahead and save that. So we'll assign it to a variable called y. So now we have two placeholders, x and y, both representing the two inputs that will be provided to us, the computer system, by the user. So now that we have both inputs, we're ready to perform our computation. So since we are interested in the sum, all we have to do is add x plus y, but then again we need to be able to store the result of that summation somewhere, so we'll specify a new variable called sum, and so now sum represents the result of this computation, and the final step is to print those results, and so we simply print sum. And so now we're ready to run our program. And so it asks us for the first number, so we'll say 5. It asks us for the second number, we say 5 again, and then we expect 10, although we're getting 55. Now the reason for this is input by default treats whatever value that's coming into the computer system as a string data type. And so once you discuss data types, you'll understand why it's doing that. However, the short answer is it's concatenating both those values together. Although we really want x to be an integer value, and so to do that we either add the keyword int, casting it as an integer, and then if we run it and give it 5 and 5, we get the value 10, which makes more sense. Or we can, instead of telling the computer system to explicitly cast whatever value we get as an integer, to just dynamically determine what the type is, which is much easier. And so now if we rerun this computer program and we say 5 and 5, we get 10. And that concludes lesson 2.